Welcome to the Week 6 Steel Scorpion Sports Guess the Line podcast. I'm half your hosting partnership, Jeff Miller.
And I'm the other half, Mark Teflon.
And Mark, as we did last week, and we'll do again this and next week, we will be doing an homage to Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal, the Guess the Line game. I hear Bill Simmons is deathly ill and probably won't be making it out to do this in the next couple weeks, so I figured we could take a shot at it.
Yeah, I heard that as well. I had seen on the internet that he had Ebola, which is pretty serious, but it turns out you can't believe everything that you read on the internet. He, in fact, does not have Ebola. It turns out he's just suspended from ESPN.
So he's not deathly ill?
No, not that we know of.
Well, then I say we do an homage to the suspended Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal and do our own version of the line game.
Sounds good.
All right, well, why don't you give us a recap of where we stand through the first 5 weeks of the season with the lines, and then kick us off for Week 6 with Indianapolis at Houston.
All right, sounds good. So, coming into Week 5, the favorites were 28, 32, and 1 against the number. In Week 5, the favorites were 8, 4, and 2. And if you've already done the math in your head, you figured out that through the Sunday night game of Week 5, the favorites are 36, 36, and 3, which also, of course, means that the underdogs are 36, 36, and 3. So those guys in Vegas seem to know what they're doing there. And coming into Week 5, the over was 33 and 28. And in Week 5, the over and unders were 7 and 7, equal split. And so through the Sunday night game of Week 5, the overs are 40 and 35. So, again, pretty close. Those guys in Vegas are pretty good at what they're doing, turns out. Looking at the Thursday night game, Colts at the Texans. So this game is pretty much the AFC South Division Championship in Week 6 because the Jags are 0-5, the Titans are 1-4. We're down to these two teams, apparently, even though we're just in Week 6. The Colts started at 0-2, have won 3 in a row, a little bit of a hot streak. The Texans won their first 2. They've lost 2 of their last 3. The game is in Houston. It's the Thursday night game, so hopefully we'll get a better game than what we've seen so far this season. So far, every single Thursday night game has been decided by at least 20 points, and the average margin of victory has been 29. So, somewhat optimistically, hoping for a close game. And with the Texans having the home field advantage, but in my mind, the Colts being better, I guess that this would be a pick 'em.
Well, I agreed with most of what you said there. I slightly leaned towards Indianapolis only because Andrew Luck's been playing so well. The Colts defense finally showed up this week against Baltimore, so I actually went with the Colts -2.
You were going to get this one. The actual spread is 2.5 for the Colts, and I should mention, since I didn't mention off the top, these lines are coming from sportsbook.com, and there were a few games that we did not have a line of for yet as of Sunday night, and for those I took the lines off of a site called footballlocks.com, which seems to have all the spreads for Week 6. So you were off to a 1-0 start, and you can go with the next game, the Jags at the Titans.
All right, well, that's a good start for me, which I need to make up for last week's loss, even though it was a close loss. With the Jags at Titans. Jacksonville, you already mentioned, the worst team in the division, 0-5. Tennessee, the worst team in the second half against the Browns, with a 28-3 lead, I believe, being blown and losing 29-28. Very impressive there. Charlie Whitehurst had to play quarterback again. That can't make anybody in Tennessee feel good. But unfortunately for Jacksonville, it doesn't seem to matter who they play against. They just can't seem to score enough points, move the ball effectively, or stop the other team enough to win games. So even though Tennessee looked so miserable in blowing that lead in the second half, they did have a first half where they built a lead. I think that'll be enough to get them as a pretty decent favorite. So I threw Tennessee in as a 5-point favorite.
5 points. Well, I agree with most of what you said. The interesting part about this game is the Jags, through 5 games, are not only 0-5 on the real record books, but I'm pretty sure they're also 0-5 against the spread. So I was thinking that Vegas is going to have a hard time getting money to put some money on the Jags, so I thought it might be a little bit higher, and I went with Titans as an 8-point favorite. And you're going to get this one as well. The actual line is just 6. And I think there's some value there. I don't know if Walker's going to be back this week, but the Jags just, I don't know if they can cover.
No, I'm not 100% sure they could cover either. 6 seems a little low. 7 maybe would have got a little more money in, I think, from Vegas. But as you said earlier in the podcast, they know what they're doing, so I guess we'll take them at their knowledgeable best. So the third game on our docket would be Baltimore at Tampa Bay.
Baltimore, Tampa Bay. The Bucks, we had originally written off when they were 0-3, and they've kind of come back lately. They won at Pittsburgh. They definitely gave the Saints quite a battle today. They're going to be back home for this game. It seems like Mike Glennon has given them a little bit of a spark. Makes you wonder why Willie Smith felt the need to go out and sign McCown for this year. But the Bucs are playing better. The Ravens played pretty well today against the Colts. Their defense looks pretty well. They stayed in there with the Colts on the road for most of the game. I pegged this as the Ravens as a 3-point favorite.
Well, we're going to share the spoils on this one. I pretty much agreed with everything you said, and I figured while Tampa Bay is at home, Baltimore's the better team, had come in with a little more heat on them, even though they just lost to the Colts. Tampa Bay, you might feel like that loss at New Orleans also could be a gut-wrenching season finale for them. Since you and I matched the spread there, we're going to split the pot, right?
Yep. So we'll each get a half win for this one, and it turns out, speaking of a half, we're both off by half a point. The actual line is Ravens minus 3.5. So Vegas has thrown in the hook on there, and we'll see how that game actually turns out. And then you can get us going on the next game, which is Broncos at the Jets.
Denver today took down the undefeated Arizona Cardinals, not surprisingly. You and I think both had already called that. The Jets, not surprisingly, came across the country. Well, actually, I should say a team in their uniforms came across the country and showed up. I don't think the real Jets did because they didn't score a single point. You and I actually produced just as many points as the New York Football Jets today. Very impressive. Peyton Manning set another record today. He will be going after Brett Favre's touchdown record soon. Phillip Rivers just carved the Jets up. I just don't see a lot that makes me feel like the Jets can be in this game. Only thing going for them is it's in the Meadowlands, and Denver has to go across the country. That being said, I don't know that really hinders Peyton and boys from Denver, so I'm throwing Denver out there, and I'm going to say 7.5, because I love throwing that hook out there.
Okay. Well, I went a little bit higher. In my estimation, the Broncos are one of the best teams in the NFL. I know they have to travel east, but the Jets, my goodness, they're 1-4. They look horrible. Not only are they 1-4, I'm not sure they should even count that one win. That one win was a home game against Oakland in Week 1, and even then they struggled. They only won by 5 points. It wasn't that convincing of a victory. When your one win is a home game against the 0-5 Raiders, 0-4 with the bye, that's not very convincing to me. So I went a little bit higher. I pegged it at the Broncos being a 9.5-point favorite, and it turns out you nailed it on the head. It is 7.5, and that number just seems too low to me. I can't foresee any scenario. Rex Ryan's already said that Geno Smith is going to start again in Week 6, and I just can't see them staying with the Broncos. I think the Broncos will cover the 7.5-point spread, especially if you can, maybe buy points, get that down to 6.5, or they're an obvious candidate for a teaser, because you just can't foresee any way that the Broncos would lose to the Jets. But you are now off to a 3.5-point lead, or 3.5 to my half point. And the next game is the Lions at the Vikings. After what I saw Thursday night of this past week, if you told me that Christian Ponder was starting this game, I would make the Lions around a 23-point favorite, I think. Because Christian Ponder was that bad, but they already said immediately after that game they wanted to assure their fans as quickly as possible, don't go find a bridge. Teddy Bridgewater will be starting in Week 6, so trying to calm the fans down a little bit. But it'll be better within the quarterback than if Ponder was playing. The Lions obviously had a tough game today, losing at home to the Bills. But taking all things into consideration, I think the Lions are a better team. Vikings get some credit for playing at home. I picked the Lions as a 2-point favorite.
Well, I agree with most of what you said. And I think you were wrong. I think they announced that Teddy Bridgewater would be starting at quarterback at halftime of the Thursday night game, just to really reassure the fans. But either way, yeah, if it were not Teddy Bridgewater, this game would be off the board. But So I actually thought they'd be favored a little more than you. I thought it would be closer to a 4-point Detroit favorite.
So we're going to split this one. The actual line is an even field goal. Lions are 3-point favorites, so we will split this one 50-50, and you are now leading 4-1 through 5 games.
Very nice, for me at least. And yes, I do like sharing the spoils there. Which leads to our next game, which would be New England at Buffalo. Now, the rumors of the Patriots' demise may have been greatly exaggerated. For those that stayed up and watched the entire Sunday night debacle, Tom Brady is not retiring. The Patriots are not benching him anytime soon, it doesn't seem, contrary to media reports earlier in the day. They went on and hung quite a lot of points. Anytime you can break 40 on the, coming into the game, the number one scoring defense in the NFL, that's a pretty nice game. And the previously undefeated Cincinnati Bengals. Buffalo, on the other hand, they have turned to the neckbeard of Kyle Orton. That seems to be a dicey proposition at best. Be that as it may, I don't see any way that Buffalo stays with New England, even though it's in Buffalo and they've had a couple of good games at home. This is a rivalry that recently, I'm fairly certain, since Lawyer Malloy a decade ago turned it in Buffalo's favor, has favored New England. So I said New England's going to be favored, and I gave them a full 4 points.
I went a little bit higher. The Bills, they're a decent team, but Kyle Orton is your quarterback. We're talking about the same guy who was replaced by the one and only Tim Tebow in Denver. Kyle Orton, to me, is just kind of a game manager. He was a game manager in Denver. Even before that, he was a game manager in Chicago. He's going to be kind of a game manager for the Bills. Bills have been decent to good tonight against Cincinnati. They seem to be back. They are 1-2 on the road, however. They lost at Miami, at Kansas City. The one win was at Minnesota when Castle threw 4 interceptions in the news that Peterson had just been suspended. So that's not that quality of road win. And apparently, I over-adjusted. I thought that the Patriots would be a 6-point favorite. Turns out the actual line is just 3, so you're going to get this one as well. You're crushing me so far this week. I feel compelled to mention that I somehow won last week 8-7, even though it seems like I have no idea what I'm doing this week. I did think that this week's schedule was much harder to kind of guess the lines than last week, and apparently that's definitely true for me. But yeah, the actual line is 3, which to me seems a little low. I mean, I gotta say, if I were to put money on this game, I would definitely be taking the Patriots minus 3 points against the Bills.
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually surprised by that. Even after I said the full 4 points, I kept thinking I'm probably too low on this, so that's weird. But I'll take it, and that'll bring us to our next game. So why don't you take us through Carolina at Cincinnati?
All right, so the Panthers at the Bengals. Of course, we just mentioned the Bengals. They didn't look too good tonight. They kind of got beaten up by the Patriots, but it was a game that you could kind of see coming with the Patriots coming off the loss in prime time to the Chiefs and kind of needing to rally at 2-2 at that point. Have a home primetime game against the Bengals, and it kind of played out how many people thought that it might. So the Bengals, despite not looking too good tonight, are clearly a better team than the Panthers. The Panthers got a much-needed win today against the Bears. Came back from behind. They were down 21-7 at one point, but then pretty much outplayed the Bears. From that point, being in Cincinnati, Bengals are the better team, home field advantage. I said that the Bengals would be a 7-point favorite.
I didn't go quite as high as you, only because I'm a little worried that Cincinnati's coming off the short week from a Sunday night away game, coming back in, and boy, did they get handled. On the flip side of that, I guess we've seen motivation for most of the teams that get beat up on a Sunday or Monday night. They turn around and tend to play a little better the next week. And Carolina, rode the emotion of the Greg Olsen revenge game to victory today. Probably not going to have that same desire against Cincinnati. I only threw it down, though, as a 5.5-point line for Cincinnati.
All right. Finally, one that I'm going to get to claim all for myself. The actual line is 6.5. So you were off by 1 point. I was off by a half. I'm quite happy to actually go on the board with my own victory here. And with the line of 6.5, this is obviously another candidate for teasers. With the teaser, you're pretty much taking the Bengals minus half a point. Like we said, they're going to be motivated. They're going to be at home. The defense isn't nearly as bad as it looked tonight against New England. And the Panthers' offense is kind of limited despite what they did against Chicago today. So I think this game is a great candidate for teachers next week. And then why don't you go with the next game, which is Steelers at the Browns.
So Pittsburgh goes down to Jacksonville. An easy, ready-made game to get the taste of that Tampa Bay loss from the week before out of their mouth. And they lay an egg and need a defensive score to really squeak by Jacksonville. Now, they did cover the 7.5-point line by winning by 8, and they did win, which if you took money line or if you teased them or even if you bet the line, you got a victory out of this, but boy, did they not look impressive. On the flip side, Cleveland just came back from a 28-3 hole. Granted, it was against Tennessee, so I see this really as a toss-up, but because of the home field advantage, I went with Cleveland as a -1 point favorite.
Okay. I agree with most of what you said. Cleveland, I think, in the eyes of Vegas, are better than the general public perceives them to be. They are 2-2, but both of their losses were pretty close, although both of their wins were pretty close as well. If you look at the margin of defeat or victory for all 4 games, it's 3 points, 2 points, 2 points, and 1 point. So based on that trend from 3-2-1, I think we can pretty much say that they're going to tie with the Steelers this week. But they have already played the Steelers in week 1. They played at Pittsburgh. They got out to a huge deficit. And unlike Tennessee, where they came back from a huge deficit and won, they came really close, but they lost 30-27. This game being at home and thinking that Vegas gives them some respect, and Pittsburgh not looking that good against Jacksonville today, I see the Browns would be at 1.5-point favorites, and the actual line is Browns by 2.5. So I'm going to get this one as well by 0.5 point. And through 8 games, you are ahead 5-3. And I will kick us off on this next game, which is the Green Bay Packers at the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Packers have a little bit extra rest having the Thursday night game, except they don't have more rest than their opponent because they're playing the Dolphins, who played in the England game and now has a full week off for their bye week this week. So they have 2 weeks to prepare. But clearly, the Packers are the better team than the Dolphins. And then with the Dolphins having home field, I pegged the Packers as a 3.5-point favorite.
Only 3.5. I went slightly higher, so I threw it out and said Green Bay was going to be a 4.5-point favorite.
I'm going to get this one. This is the one game of the week that I nailed on the head. It is Packers -3.5, and all of a sudden here we have ourselves a contest. So through 9 games now, you have 5. I have 4. Things are tightening up a little bit. And then why don't you get us started on Chargers at the Raiders?
Well, I don't think we need to say much more on Oakland. We've disparaged them through at least half the previous games, either because of teams they've played or teams that played someone that has played them. So Oakland's bad. San Diego, the opposite of bad, which is good. San Diego decimated the Jets. They've taken care, really, of the bad teams. They've played bad teams on their schedule. They beat the bad teams on their schedule. They had a tough loss to open the season in the late game in Arizona on Monday night. Other than that, they've had really good success. Even with all the injuries they've faced, they still seem to be able to win. Today they played someone named Oliver in the backfield, and they were able to produce rushing yards, touchdowns. Phillip Rivers is slinging the ball. And the only thing that gives me pause in this matchup is last year, Oakland was equally bad, and San Diego went up to Oakland and lost. It seems to be a tough place for them to play, but I'm going to say they're getting over it this year. And I also think Vegas knows everyone views Oakland as a pretty bad team. To get any money going on this, they've got to at least give you something to bet on Oakland. So I think they're going to give the Chargers, even on the road, a touchdown.
See the Chargers as a 7-point favorite.
I do.
I went a little bit higher. The Chargers are 4-1. Their one loss was the close game at Arizona in week 1. Their defense hasn't given up more than 21 points in a game all season, and that was to the defending Super Bowl champion Seahawks. The Raiders, as we said, are horrible. They're 0-5. Honestly, if I were kind of setting this line myself, I probably would have put around 10, 11, 12. But when you factor in the fact that the Raiders had to bye, so they have 2 weeks to prepare, and they have the new interim coach. You might you have to figure there might be some kind of spark from having Tony Sparano in there and getting some different leadership going on, and the fact that they're division rivals. And like you said, the Raiders actually beat the Chargers in Oakland last year. So I went with 8.5, and the line is 8. So with 4 in a row is now 5-5. And I must say, with a line of 8, this is another one that I really like, especially in the teaser. You can't envision San Diego losing to Oakland, and honestly, this one could be a blowout. The Raiders are just really, really bad, and the Chargers are probably one of the better teams in football right now. It just seems like a game that the Chargers should win by 3 touchdowns or more. But we'll see how it plays out in Week 6. The next game on the docket is Chicago at Atlanta. The Bears, of course, we talked about earlier, had a lead on the Panthers today. Did not pull it off. That was the first road loss. They were 2-0 on the road before that. Now here they are with their 4th road game. The Falcons playing at home. They lost at the Giants today. Did not look that great. But I figured that Vegas would view the Falcons as a slightly better team than Chicago. And then with the home field advantage as well, I said the Falcons would be a 4.5 point favorite.
Well, I went slightly under you. Atlanta's not a sexy Vegas pick. Not a lot of money flies in on Atlanta. A little more might fly in on Chicago, I figured. So I went with Atlanta being favored as well, but at 3.5.
3.5. You're going to get this one. The actual line is 3. So the Falcons are favored by a field goal. And in 11 games, you retake the lead 6-5. And why don't you get it started on the next game? The Cowboys at the Seahawks.
Well, obviously, we don't know the results of Seattle's Monday night game yet, which means they're also going to have a short week to prepare for the Cowboys, who did manage in overtime to overcome the Houston Texans in what seemed like an away game, but turns out to have taken place in Jerry's world. Take that what it's worth to you. But Dallas's strength so far this year, contrary to the few years past, has been running the ball. DeMarco Murray has either led the league in rushing each week or been second or third, I believe. He is off to an amazing start. Unfortunately, he's going to run into a defense in their home stadium that is probably the best in the league. And then you factor in the Tony Romo factor. He won't be able to hear. If the running game isn't going, his play action isn't going to be as effective. They're going to get into passing situations where he is probably not who you want throwing the ball around the yard. And Seattle, well, they just don't lose at home. And I don't see them losing to Tony Romo. I think Vegas is probably feeling the same way, and the way Seattle has handled people at home, to get the money to flow on both sides of this equation, because Dallas always brings money to the table, I think they've got to put a pretty decent-sized number there, but not too big to scare them off. So I said they'd go just under the magic number and throw Seattle as a 6.5 point favorite.
I went a little bit higher than you, just based on the fact that, Seattle is so tough at home. The one disadvantage here is, like you said, playing in the Monday night game. And not only that, a Monday night game on the East Coast, and then have to fly all the way back. But, they're so tough at home. The Cowboys are 2-0 on the road this year, but 2 not so impressive teams. So I went with the Seahawks as an 8-point favorite, and it turns out the actual line is 8.5. So I will take that one. Through 12 games, it is now 6-6 with 3 games to go. I'll get it started on the first of those 3. It's Washington at Arizona. Of course, like I said, we don't know the Washington's Week 5 result. They play tomorrow night against Seattle. You have to figure they're probably going to lose that one. Then they have to travel the other side of the country to play the Cardinals. And the Cardinals had a tough loss today, but again, you kind of had to expect that. They're playing at Denver. Not an easy place to win. We don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be yet. Houston started his 3rd straight game today, but you have to figure there's a chance that Carson Palmer might be back in this week. And with home field advantage, being a better team than Washington, I said the Cardinals would be a 7.5 point favorite.
Wow, 7.5. That's a little higher than because again, we didn't understand whether or not Carson Palmer would be back. He had to see a nerve specialist. It's not going as well as he expected. His backup knocked out of the game this week. So it's the backup to the backup that came in and actually did throw a touchdown against the Broncos. But I don't see that making Vegas, at least at this point, with the unknowns out there, making it seem like they should be putting more on Arizona. But on the flip side, as you said, Washington has a lot of negatives against it. Namely, we've only seen Kirk Cousins in a limited role. Looked good against a bad team, looked bad against a good team. So I can't imagine they really like the idea of throwing too much on Washington. But I didn't quite go as high as you. I went with Arizona, but 6.5.
6.5. Well, at least I feel that you're in the neighborhood as me, so I don't feel quite as bad. We both missed this one by quite a lot, but you missed it by slightly less. The actual line is 3. This is the farthest off that I've been on, any game is trying to pick the spread. I was a full 4.5 points off, but at 3.5 points off, you were closer. But clearly, if we're both thinking 6.5 and 7.5, and the actual line is 3, then this clearly is a game that we think that there's some strong value on Arizona.
Yeah, I would imagine we both would feel comfortable placing something in Arizona, especially if we knew better the quarterback situation. I imagine that's probably what kept the number down. Vegas must really be worried that some guy named Logan Thomas is going to be starting at quarterback, and if that's the case, you can't feel comfortable doing much more than giving the home field advantage, although you and I would say Arizona's defense is good enough against a Kirk Cousins-led offense. That might be all they need.
Yeah, and Arizona passing today, it probably is the QB situation that kept the number low. Drew Stanton, no interceptions, but he was 11 out of 26 for 118 yards. And Logan Thomas came in. He was 1 of 8. Now, that one completion was an 81-yard touchdown on Ray Ellington, but still, 1 out of 8 and 11 out of 26. Denver's defense is decent, definitely not great. So, again, that kind of performance in Vegas is probably wondering, well, which one of these jokers will start, or will Carson Palmer come back? But clearly, if you think there's a chance that Carson Palmer might come back, and you can get the number 3 right now, maybe put some action on it.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to the last 2 games, and if I'm tallying this correctly, I have a 1-game lead.
You're at 7-6 with 2 games to go.
All right, well, I will lead us off then on the New York Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. Philly raced out to a big lead today against St. Louis and then held on by the skin of their teeth to win the game, surprisingly. St. Louis, not an offense that I would have imagined is built for the comeback, especially with Austin Davis quarterback, but I was wrong on that front. The Giants, on the other hand, definitely handled business at home. They look like they're on the upswing. They beat Atlanta today by 10 points. From the start of the season, when after a couple weeks people were calling for Tom Coughlin's head and wondering if they should cut bait with Eli Manning, till today, they're game back, but they're right back in the thick of things with the Eagles and Cowboys. I think people are more comfortable with the Giants. And we both know East Coast teams, a lot of money. In this case, you have 2 East Coast teams. So I said Philly's the better team. They have the home field advantage. But I kind of felt like New York is riding a little bit more of a hot streak and has the money factor. Still, it's a New York team. So I knocked a little off of that, and I said it was going to be Philly 2.5.
Philly 3.5.
2.5.
2.5.
Yes.
Philly 2.5. Okay. I agree with most of what you said, though. I thought Philly would be a little bit more of a favorite playing at home. But the Giants have looked good lately. Like you said, they got off to an 0-2 start, but the last 3 wins have all been by double digits, whereas Philly's looked a little shakier. They were in the game with San Francisco, but definitely not because of their offense. All 3 touchdowns were special teams related. And then even against the Rams today, some special team scores and kind of got out to a big lead, then had to hold on, and St. Louis came back. But so in that respect, I might have made the number too high. I said Eagles -4, and the actual spread is 3. So you are half a point closer. You're going to get this one, which locks up the week for you, because you're now ahead 8-6 with 1 game to go. So congratulations on winning this week. With my win last week, we're now 1-1. We'll be doing this again next week while Bill Simmons and Cousin Fowler are again suspended. And that one, as people may remember from our last podcast, will be for the stakes of the winner gets to rename the team of the losers team. So we'll go into this last game. The last game is the Monday night game in Week 6. The 49ers are at the Rams. Divisional game. The Rams We just mentioned played at the Eagles today. Got out to a disaster start. We're way behind, but they did come back and make it close. Austin Davis looks like he could be a decent quarterback. San Francisco made it home today. They beat the Chiefs, beat the Eagles before that, so they've recovered from their 1-2 start. In a divisional game, giving the Rams the home field advantage, but knowing that the Niners are a better team, I said that the Niners would be favored by 4.
Well, great minds think alike. I went a little lower than you for San Francisco to be favored. Still, I think San Francisco is the better team. I said San Francisco was going to be a 3-point favorite.
We are going to split this one. The actual number is right in between. The 49ers are 3.5-point favorite, so we'll each get a half. And you win the week 8.5 to 6.5.
So cumulatively, if I am adding this up correctly, I'm up a half point on you.
I can neither confirm nor deny. I don't have a calculator in front of me, so I can't do that math at this point. But if you want to believe that, that's fine.
You can hear the abacus clicking as I move the beads around. But yes, it is the case. So now I believe cumulative is the tiebreaker if we didn't decide that previously, so I like this.
I don't think we decided that previously, and it's obviously too late to come up with such shenanigans now, so we'll have to see.
All right, well, maybe we can pull Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal in to help us break a tie if there happens to be one. Although I think next week, after this week, I'm feeling pretty confident, and I think next week is going to be another victory for me, and I'm going to get to rename your sissy little team that has moved from last place. I am impressed. You probably have moved from last place up the rungs of the standings a bit, but I can't wait to be renaming your team next week.
We shall see. I already have your new team name in mind, which gives me the proper motivation to focus my efforts for next week. Like I said, this week I was off my game a little bit, or if these games were just kind of not striking me, I will say the schedule for week 6 doesn't seem to be that great. There's not that many compelling games that jump out at you, like, oh, I need to see this game. Like, I honestly think that the Thursday night game, Colts at Texans, might be the best game of the week, which is a scary statement to say given how bad the Thursday night games have been so far. But when I look at the rest of the schedule, there could be some close games, but there's none that just really kind of stand out as a great game to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I will say, full disclosure, you're a big Colts fan, for those that don't know. So the fact that you said the Colts at Houston and the Thursday night game might be the best of the week, while it is the best of the matchups from a divisional standpoint, you did make the note of the Thursday night games. And if I had to say that one of these two teams was going to blow the other out, which has happened every week on a Thursday night, I'd say it's the Colts that would likely blow out Houston. The only other games that really jump off the page at me are the Dallas at Seattle, because it'll be interesting to see, is this Dallas team even remotely for real? Will they be able to run the ball in Seattle? Can they go into the 12th man and try and control the game a bit? I don't think they can, but it'll be interesting to see. And of course, as we noted earlier with the line there, you may want to have some Seattle action in a teaser. The other game, I think, was probably the Carolina at Cincy. I'll give full disclosure here. I'm cheering against Carolina every week of the season, having taken the under on their wins total. But I want to see how Cincy bounces back from that beat down they took from New England on Monday night. On a short week, they head back home where they've been really tough to beat in the last 2 years. And Carolina, off that strange somehow come from behind victory against the Bears, gets to go on the road and see if they can handle another pretty good team, in this case a really good defensive team in Cincy.
Those could be good games. I find it somewhat interesting that, one of the games you mentioned is wanting to watch Cowboys at Seahawks is actually the highest spread of the week. So conventional wisdom would say that, that one might be the one that kind of gets out of hand or has the largest margin. Also kind of interesting that the largest spread this week is 8.5. We've had some games this year where we've seen spreads as so high as 13 or 14. And we have teams like the Raiders and the Jaguars involved. That's what happens. But both of those teams happen to be, actually, I guess the Jags are on the road, still just a 6-point underdog. But Cowboys Seahawks, the largest spread of the week, and then the two lowest spreads of the week are actually the Colts Texans, which, again, kind of surprising that the lowest spread of the week is a Thursday night game, which tends to be a blowout. And that's tied with the Steelers Browns, with the Browns being a 2.5-point favorite. tied for the two lowest spreads of the week, and quite a few field goal games. I'm looking down the list here. We have a 3.5, 3-3, 3.5, 3, 3-3, 3.5. So maybe it's a better week than I was thinking. There's no real compelling matchups when I look at the two teams that are involved, but maybe we'll have a week of a lot of close games, given how close these spreads are.
Yeah, and a couple things to keep in mind again for those that follow the betting process. This has been declared the year of the dog, so a lot of those where you hear the 3.5, most conventional wisdom would be telling you to take the underdog, especially if you're at the 3.5 number. Anytime the hook's laid out there, it seems like Vegas is begging you to take that. Of course, that's the flip side of that. Anytime Vegas begs you to take a bet, it's usually not in your favor because they don't build the really big casinos because you win all the time. So it's kind of a catch-22 in that regard. But Mark, just before we sign off tonight, any one or two lines here that you're really feeling like you'd love to throw a teaser on, or a couple that you would just bet the number that you're seeing?
As far as the teaser, I think you mentioned one of them. Seahawks 8.5-point favorite. You can tease that down to under a field goal. They don't really lose at home, although you do have to factor that having less rest and having to travel across the country after playing Monday night at Washington. The one that I like the best straight up against the number is the Broncos at the Jets, and the Broncos are only a 7.5-point favorite. And if you're one of those that likes to buy the points to get it down to 7 just to cover yourself in case, the Jets get a backdoor cover at the end, I just can't see. I mean, the Broncos are one of the best, 2 or 3 teams in the NFL. The Jets are one of the worst. They're 1-4. They're 1 winners against the Raiders. They're a team in disarray. They pulled Geno Smith this week for Mike Vick, and now they've already said that Geno Smith will again be the starter in Week 6. Their offense was atrocious today. They have no good receivers, especially if Decker's out. And we might figure that if Decker's healthy, he might be looking for some revenge against the Broncos, but he missed this week, was ineffective the week before. I can honestly see the Broncos winning that game by 28 points higher.
Yeah, and I think your Decker revenge point is very nice. We saw the Steve Smith revenge game, the Greg Olsen revenge game. The only problem Eric Decker has going against him is he has Geno Smith quarterbacking, not Peyton Manning. So it's going to be a lot harder to get revenge when the guy throwing you the ball isn't quite the caliber that you had before. And if he's really that upset about it, he can at least go look at his bank account and feel a little bit better.
Very true.
All right, well, I think that's a job well done tonight, especially by me on the lines. So for Week 6 of the line game, again, I, Jeff Miller from San Diego, have won, evened up the series with you, Mark Heflin. And now we'll have a Week 7 for all the marbles as we again pay homage to our dearly departed Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal, who have departed the airwaves for 3 weeks thanks to the ESPN suspension.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to next week. I will be properly focused and motivated to make sure that I can rename your team.
As will I, and I can't wait to rename your team. So with that, signing off from San Diego, I'm Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, Mark Heflin.
All right, and come back tomorrow to SteelScorpionSports.com, and you can hear our weekly podcast. We'll go over some of the fantasy results from the week, some of the highlights from all the action of the week that we didn't touch on here, and also get you ready for the fantasy football to come for Week 6. All right, listeners, thanks again.